What's up, y'all? Welcome back. Scaling Ventures podcast. You probably know what we're up to, building a portfolio of niche vertical SaaS firms that punch like 50 milli ARR giants. Kjael, back with you riding solo today. And the topic du jour is designing the perfect average week. So I've spoken about this in various ways. And obviously I'm a big subscriber to kind of general frameworks or mental models for productivity. And perfect average week is one I've touched on many times. But this is generally through the lens of that kind of thing or calendar or allocation of time and thoughtful, kind of predictable, consistently executable allocation of time is like generally the operating system for the CEO to create focus and leverage. And in terms of a table of contents, I'll kind of introduce the topic by way of metaphor. You know how we get down. I'll frame what a perfect average week is for those that are less familiar. We'll lean into it a little bit in terms of anatomy. I'll introduce somewhat of a new concept, which is Chief Executive Productivity Blocks, or CEP blocks, as I've been calling them, which kind of maps, as you guessed, right to the perfect average week. And then we'll also touch on the anatomy of a perfect average day, because those are separate but very well connected. And then I guess I'll make an argument for why it works, and we'll wrap with how you can do BYO, how you can build your own. So the metaphor here, and it's a good one. And it's funny, gosh, how often in these discussions you revert to a metaphor that's based on fitness or athletes or professional sports. But in this context, it's, imagine being a professional athlete that kind of shows up to the gym every day or shows up to the training pitch every day, and you just don't really know what you're going to work on. And a lot of it's kind of reactive. But the thing is, it's not as intentional. It's generally reactive. And you're kind of just hopeful that you're focused on the right stuff as a function of things that yield operating leverage, where you get more units of return than a singular return of your effort, right? So you put 1 unit of effort into something and you get +1 units back. And that's kind of the headline here, is we're on this relentless pursuit. And the CEO's biggest job is to apply themselves in a way that creates operating leverage for themselves and then expresses as outsized kind of impact or transformation at the firm level. So I want to suggest that the calendar is like the strategy artifact. And, there's a lot of, like, Rob Diedrich has some crazy stuff where he calendarizes literally to 15 minutes on his calendar. There's Elon and that whole audience kind of own, like, I guess they see time in increments of 15 minutes, just to tell you how much they appreciate that time is like truly the most kind of finite resource or constraint really in life, but especially in business. So let's move on to a perfect average week. A dear friend of mine once kind of introduced this thing to me as like Wednesday being peak performance day. And so I guess I kind of want to suggest that the first guiding principle or design principle around a perfect average week is that, yes, the headline is you're managing your time, but perhaps more importantly, you're managing your energy. So put simply, you probably don't want to start Monday morning with an insanely cognitively dense activity because you're just not warmed up, right? Back to that kind of athlete metaphor. Like you're cold, right? You're coming off the weekend. The same on Friday when you're cooked. And so the meat of the week, back to the kind of headline here, is, Wednesday's peak performance. So you probably want to be managing your week around the activities and the stuff you need to do, and kind of slotting peak difficulty stuff on a Wednesday when you're totally primed up and you're moving, you've got momentum. So we'll elaborate more on that. But I did just kind of want to touch on, like, the week should be designed, and you want to think about it not only through the context of like maximizing your time, but also coordinating your activities such that you're exploiting peak energy when the task is the most difficult. So I'll complement this now with a look at Chief Executive Productivity Blocks, which is a lot of words. And I'm going to just pull this up because I've got a cheeky visual here. I've been putting some energy into the visuals for the folks that are watching on YouTube. So Chief Executive kind of productivity blocks, CEP blocks, if we will. And again, like back to like this context of rhythm and a few other things. And obviously I've studied this for many years now and the few iterations on the other side. But this concept of like, okay, so what are the things we know? We want to manage energy, which means like on a weekly basis, Wednesday's probably peak performance. And we also want to minimize context switching because we know that's the brain killer. So we want to group activities. We want to try to theme days if we can, et cetera. And so in that context is kind of this concept of Chief Executive Productivity Blocks. So if we would say, for instance, and you kind of want to wrap clear domains around this, but just to kind of jump to the chase, right? So you probably want to theme your days. So maybe Monday is kind of orient, review scorecards, take stock of weekly improvement on the business, digest game film, read call transcripts, read notes, maybe spend some time in the product to build product empathy. But whatever the case may be, it's like Monday has a theme. Tuesday has a theme, Wednesday has a theme, onward and forward. And so it's kind of the domains that I anchor around are kind of product or market empathy and kind of taking stock, where Monday is kind of orienting and inputs and kind of thinking. Tuesday's customer acquisition, Wednesday's customer success, Thursday's market alignment, and Friday's reflection. So those, each day kind of gets a clear domain, and then you time box an activity that maps to those domains. So Monday is product empathy day. And then your chief executive productivity menu would be like one or two things that slot into that theme that are time boxed during that time of the day. That was pretty confusing. So let me try to simplify it a little bit. So here, let me share my screen and then I'll talk through it. Or I can kind of bring this up now, right? So to elaborate a little bit. So for me, Monday is inputs and product empathy. So this is orient and listen, review scorecards, kind of validate weekly objectives, look at the week ahead. What kind of big sales calls do we have? What kind of big customer success or support call, or what are the kind of big support issues, we need to resolve, et cetera. Tuesday is sales and growth. So that's probably around pipeline and go to market, et cetera. Wednesday is go to market, meaning, channels, performance of channels, allocation of resources to channels, feedback loops, that kind of stuff. Wednesday is customer success. So, delivery and adoption, listening to onboarding reviews, walking through escalation, stepping into the support inbox and getting a taste for kind of what the patterns are around support issues, things like that. And then so forth and on or whatever. So this is what a perfect average week might look like. Or actually, let's put it in context of a perfect average day, and then we'll bring it together with a visual. So for me, perfect average day, and the headline here is more so like this thesis around consistent quality performance compounds like crazy. So a perfect average week is not going to happen all the time, but if it happens on average, your impact and your kind of effort is going to compound extremely well. Same for a perfect average day. And we all have different kind of energy. There's like morning early birds, there's night owls. For me, I'm like an early bird. And so my mornings are for deep contribution. So this is stepping back. And if we're thinking about your calendar as like a Tetris board, Monday morning, or the mornings are the most critical time for me anyway, to fixate and drive direct impact to strategic outcomes and opportunities. And other languages, that might be OKRs, something like that, but contributing directly to needle moving activity. Midday is when I group my meetings. So this is going to be functional stand-ups, 1v1s, reviews, something like that. And then in the afternoon is when I tackle my CEP blocks. So, and there's another kind of cool way to think about this in terms of like our primal wiring, which is kind of hunt in the morning and gather in the afternoon, is something that I use as kind of a guiding principle. So anyway, that's what that looks like. And this is what it might look like visually for the watchers. And I generally just talk through it pretty well for the listeners, but we'll bounce through this real quick. So this brings it to life a little bit here. So this is what a perfect out. And I think what's interesting too, and I haven't really touched on this yet, is that ideally, like, your CEP blocks are actionable not only for yourself, but for the broader business. So what does that mean? Like, generally you want there to be some kind of artifact that is the output of these CEP blocks. So on Monday, when it's inputs and product empathy, reviewing scorecards, confirming weekly objectives, et cetera, you might that might express as some notes for the business. Like, hey, I noticed a bit of friction in this kind of workflow in the product, or I noticed in the last 2 or 3 customer success kind of account check-ins that this has become kind of an adoption point of friction, et cetera. Tuesday's sales and growth, you might look at kind of tier 1 pain signals, like recently closed lost deals. Why did we lose those? How do we make the feedback loop tighter? And that might express as a pipeline insight or a refreshed, more tuned point of view on the key pain signals that your function is, or that your SaaS solves for, and how that expresses and how you identify accounts and go to market, et cetera. So I'll leave it at that. And then if we bounce down here, this is more of what a perfect average day might look like. And these little liney things on the right are meant to kind of expose energy levels. So 6 a.m. to 11 a.m. And that's bullish. I shoot for 2 hours of like really good focus time in the mornings. But the main thing is no meetings, no Slack, and it's concentrated effort on high leverage work that directly shifts business trajectory. So this is, again, moving away from, or in our context, kind of micro SaaS, very flat organizations. Like, you damn well better be a high impact direct contributor as a CEO. It's not just pure delegation. It's not just pure org design and team meetings and keeping the squad jazzed and on task, et cetera. It's about moving the needle yourself. And then, as I mentioned, midday, 11 to maybe 1 or 2 p.m. is kind of coordination. So, you step back into Slack, catch up on stuff, have your 1v1s, adhere to those agendas, et cetera. And then in the afternoon, you have these CEP blocks. And what I should mention is that the one thing that you're almost always dependent on or have to be reactive to are market facing activity. So sales calls overwrite any of this stuff. Customer success calls, big support issues, key account kind of check-ins, that stuff overwrites your schedule. But to a degree, you want to try, in the sense that you can be proactive in those scenarios, you want to group when those activities happen, right? To preserve that high impact focus time whenever it is. And again, it's so, your perfect average week might look like Wednesday and mornings are this focus work, but they're also kind of a sweet spot for market facing activity, because I want to group those calls during that time. And that's when I know I'm going to be sharpest, something like that. So the headline here is like kind of mornings are for trajectory, afternoons are for signal. And then in the evenings, it's kind of like an expansion. So, you kind of wrap your day with getting oriented around learning lessons from the day, thinking and tuning your game plan for tomorrow, maybe consuming some industry or category specific content and try to sharpen the axe, stuff like that. And I generally, group those activities for Friday. So Friday is very much for me like a reflect on the week, deep reflection. I have a weekly journaling ritual, step into my content backlog, consume knowledge, like study the game is really for my Fridays. And this is a bit all over the place, forgive me, but hopefully this is productive. And so I guess in terms of why it works, the coverage, right? It kind of ensures coverage of the domains or the substance that mean the most. So no major business loops or kind of domains get ignored. The CEP sessions, and kind of you have actionable, useful artifacts that are kind of an output of these types of sessions or of your day that can support their broader business. And then there's just discipline around daily and weekly themes. So again, reduce context switching, ensure that your energy is mapped to the degree of difficulty of a task or something like that. And the headline here is just compounding. Like you want to introduce a little bit of system thinking to your world and planning, and that if you execute consistently, you should be able to string together a bunch of perfect average weeks, which translates to a bunch of perfect average months, perfect average quarters. And then the score, as they say, the score takes care of itself. So much love, y'all. I hope this is helpful. If anybody other is studying and kind of has thoughts on productivity systems and thinks this is misguided, I am all ears. And if this is helpful, flip it to somebody. Like, subscribe, ring the bell, whatever. But much love. Thanks for joining us on this journey. For the love of the game. Laser beams. Yeah. See you next time.